Well, good morning to everybody. Good to see you. Hope you had a good night rest. Last day of our gospel meeting together. I understand this is your first weekend type meeting. We do one of these every year and really enjoy it at home. It seems like we have a concentrated time together, and with our busy schedules, it seems to fits at home where I am with that group. And I know a lot of different people that do it, so I hope you have a good experience with it and be something that you want to continue. We're talking about the family over this weekend. Everywhere that I have preached, I have had to help people, talk them through. And when I was young, I didn't understand how to help them. I still don't understand all the how to, but I also have come to observe things about parents who have children that have left the Lord. Where I preach now, there are several families that none of their children are faithful. And you kind of shake your head at that and wonder, how could that happen? How could they have 3 and 4 children or 2 children and at least not have one that serves the Lord? There's a lot of factors in that. You have the factor in the play of the person you're thinking about. Don and I both have siblings that do not serve God. You probably do too. And if you do, you know that you grew up with the same godly parents, same good influence, same temptations that were before you were before them. Why did you choose to do the right thing and they chose to do the wrong thing? Well, there's a lot of factors in that, but at the bottom line is God tells us not everybody's going to love God. Some people are going to love darkness, and He makes that very clear in the book of John especially. It's hard for us to think about that when it's our family, when we reared them, when we saw them from the time they're little babies all the way up through childhood, teenage, adulthood, and then just watch them reject God, just watch them walk away from God. It's hard to handle that. There's the other factor that parents can be responsible for that. We saw that last night. That was our sermon about 3 fathers that failed that we looked at in the Old Testament. Maybe Samuel's correlation is just a guesswork, I think, and it is guesswork. I mean, I don't know why Abijah and Joel failed, but both of his children were lost. You have the reason in Eli and David, and in both cases you see fathers had played a negative impact that led to the bad choices that some of their sons made. And because of that, or they didn't respond to their sons as they ought to have responded, and God held them accountable. There's just multiple factors, but here's the thing that I know about both. There's pain in every family. Whether they're the reason that they walked away or they're not the reason they walked away, there's still the severe pain in the heart of a parent when your child walks away from God and you love God and you understand what that means for eternity. You understand what that means, or why are we here? Why are we doing this? If we are just going to eat, drink, and be merry tomorrow we die, then just live like everybody else does. But we understand there's a reality there. Jesus arose from the dead. We will face Him in judgment, and He made us, and He made us to live with Him forever, and those things are true. So what I want to do in this class time, and by the way, what time do I need to be done by? 9:45, thank you. Do I get any kind of warning? Only, okay, all right. When people start walking out? Okay. I want to think about how we could help you, things that we might say when you think that I have failed as a parent. And so I hope this lesson will be of help to you. I do not mean to cause further pain to you, because I have a feeling that I'm preaching to people this morning, and you have kids that have walked away from God. You have brothers and sisters that you love. I'm talking about your physical brothers and sisters that walked away from God. And so I hope that some of these things we say will help you this morning. So let's think together about what the reaction of parents are many times when that happens. The first thing that I would say, of course, is the anxiety and fear. In Proverbs 20 and verse 20, it says, "Whoever curses his father or his mother, his lamp will be put out in deep darkness." Or Proverbs 30:17, "The eye that mocks his father and scorns obedience to his mother, the ravens of the valley will pick it out, the young eagles will eat it out." All of us have people in our family that have gone way, way away from God. In fact, they're in drugs, they're in alcohol, probably divorces multiplied, their lives are a mess. They're constantly coming to you for money. It's all those things that happen to a life that unravels before God. When I go down the road in Texas, and you probably know this too, the state of Texas allows those crosses on the sides of roads to be there. They mow around them and everything. You know why that is? Because most of those lives ended up probably alcoholism, probably drunk driving, caused that death that's at that place. And they want you to think about that. That's why they let those crosses remain, and that people go there and decorate them and all of that. They want you to think about the seriousness of that. And I always think about that and think about the tragedy that happened to the life of some family or other families that were involved in that. Because the eye that mocks his father and scorns obedience to his mother, the ravens of the valley will pick it out. That's what happens to that kind of life. So there is a great fear on our part. What will become of our son or daughter that's gone away? We know eternally, but we also know the consequences that often happen in time. The second thing that I think happens with parents is just anger. I've known several people who have spent thousands and thousands of dollars to get their kid out of jail, to get them into rehab so that they can straighten them up out of drugs or alcohol, that have spent endless time and work and on lawyers and rehab and everything that you imagine trying to get their children to straighten up. Well, that's Luke 15. That's the prodigal son who comes to his father and says, "I've had it. I want my inheritance. I want to get away from you. I want to get away from everything that you stand for." And that horrible story that we read in that. Or in Proverbs 28 and 24, "Whoever robs his father or his mother and says it is no transgression, the same as a companion to destroyers." How wrong is that when our children behave in that way? And so it can cause anger to well up in the heart of a parent when they have shown no gratefulness, no respect, no honor. And then thirdly, there's just many times embarrassment. In Proverbs 19:26, "He who mistreats his father and chases away his mother is a son who causes shame and brings reproach." Sometimes my son has said to me, the reasons that he said, I don't want to do wrong is because, "Dad, what I know it could do to you, what I know could happen to you in a church." Many times people are embarrassed. They just, how are we going to face people at church? Everyone's going to ask us what happened to John or Mary. Our pride is wounded. And think of the loss of influence and credibility. Folks, I've known elders that had to step down from serving as an elder because of the egregious behavior of one of their children. It was in a community, there's no way to escape it. Their ability to influence anybody thereafter would always be suspect. There always would be, well, you can't even, if you went to somebody else, you can't even manage your own house. And I've watched preachers have to leave a congregation for the same reason. And then, of course, there is the sorrow and the despair. I have cried with people. You have cried with them. You have shed tears sometimes over and over again for the rebelliousness of a child. In Proverbs 17:21, "He who begets a scoffer does so to his sorrow, and the father of a fool has no joy." You know those words? That David put his hand over his mouth, and he went up crying, weeping, "O Absalom, my son, my son. O Absalom, my son, my son. Would that I had died in your place." All hope is gone. I have been with parents in that terrible place. And then there's bitterness that can happen. Bitterness because other people, it seems like, you look at their families and they have happy Thanksgivings and all the family gatherings. Everybody's faithful. Everybody's a joy. They come to congregation sometimes. The whole family's together. And you think about your circumstances. And sometimes you can look across that and you can get bitter. I liken it in my feelings of understanding what it's like to go to Facebook and see all these grandparents kissing grandbabies and having them and everything, and realizing that most likely I'll never be a grandfather. And I didn't plan for that to happen. I love little kids. And I know what that means. I know what it felt like to have my own son. I can only imagine what that feeling's like because I hear grandparents talk about it. My son was born a severe preemie. He was 24 weeks when he was born. They can't even push that. In the 35 years he's been alive, that number of weeks cannot be pushed. You have to be able to breathe outside the womb. And they just haven't, even with the technology that has come and gone since then, been able to push that date. That's just where they can save you, but there's lots of problems. You were not fully cooked, and it wasn't ready for you to come. And you go through a lot of stuff. We went through surgeries and doctors and thousands of dollars and time and angst and all of that. And then I read a statistic. My wife reads me a statistic one day and says 70% of severe preemie kids never marry. 2 out of 3 never marry. And you know what that is? I've followed it all my life. He's catching up. His whole life is behind. He's just now reaching a point where he's probably caught up to his age. And that's why most of them never get married, I think. So I watch all of you have grandkids and have multiple grandkids and everything. And I'm going to tell you, sometimes it's hard for me to watch that on Facebook. I understand that. I understand how you could look across at a family that has all the children obedient to God. And in my case, that's the thing I give thanks to God all the time, that my son loves God and honors God. I can imagine how much more complicated my life would be, and that bitterness that could come from a child who doesn't serve God and watching other people's families seemingly have it together. And then there's the inevitable guilt that you're going to feel because you believe you may have done something, that you're the reason that happened. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. And we ask ourselves, did we leave our child to himself at some point? Were we like Eli last night? Were we like David? Did we not do what we ought to do? And are we the ones that are to be blamed? Well, I can't ignore that. Remember that in the qualifications of elders, it says very clearly, doesn't it, that if he does not know how to manage his own house, how will he know how to manage the house of God? So there is a correlation, right? Directly. That people can look at you and your children, and looking at your children, say, that man knows how to manage his own house. Therefore, he'll know how to manage the household of God. And God makes that correlation. I can't escape that. We are responsible to a point, because they have a will too, right? And you can do everything that you can do, and somebody walks away from God, but then you're responsible to do what Eli should have done and he didn't do, that David should have done to Amnon and didn't do, Absalom and didn't do, Adonijah and didn't do. But we are not always, as I pointed out last night, guilty for what happens. Well, how do we biblically respond to all of this? First of all, to anxiety and fear, I would simply say we must have the faith and love that God does. The same God who says He is the God, the Father of all spirits. It is an amazing thing that two human beings, as a husband and wife, come together and they make a new human being, like Barrett and Shannon are almost about to do. And God ensouls that human being with one made in His image. that the soul apart from the body is death, so that the moment that a baby is alive, the moment that they're conceived, God ensouls that baby with that part that is made in the image of God. That is an amazing thing. That God brings more beings, human beings, into being because He wants to have a family. He is God the Father. And if we think God never cries, you've not read the Bible. That God weeps when His sons and daughters walk away from Him. The angst, for instance, of Hosea, you read Hosea 11, my heart churns within me. He talks about, how can I do this to you? How can I make you, he says, like Zeboam and Admah? And when you look those cities up, those are the sister cities. There were 5 of them. Remember that Lot fled to that little one, Zoar. But Zeboam and Admah are the sister cities to Sodom and Gomorrah. Now that one rings a bell. And he says, how can I make you like Admah and Zeboam? My heart, I cannot. God just is the angst of a parent over his child. And there was God finally coming to the point that He had to chastise them. He had to send them into captivity. He had to slaughter them by the thousands at the hands of the Babylonians, at ultimately the hands of the Romans. But always, always was a hope that there was a remnant. There would come out of captivity a remnant of faithful children who would love Him with all of their heart and soul and mind. And so you have to have that same kind of faith and love, tough love, that God had. In answer to anger, it's the answer to all anger. We have to control it. Anger is a dangerous thing. Therefore, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath, for the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Or Ephesians 4:26, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down in wrath. Do not give place to the devil. How dangerous anger is. We must deal with it. Don't let it cause you to say something to your wayward child that not only will you live to regret, but may be the thing that pushes them over the edge, and you'll never have a chance to get them back. That is a delicate balance. To say the right things that need to be said, to say it in the right way, to say it at the right time, to know what needs to be done. Or we could complicate things beyond what already is a terrible situation. Embarrassment, in the end, really is more about our pride and selfishness, isn't it? I've known people that were so into their image before others that they would play the game of that, creating that image. Like you think of a politician who we finally find out what they really are and what they really do, and they've just been polishing something that people see on the outside. Instead of saying, how could a son or daughter do this to me, shouldn't we be saying, how could a son or daughter do this to themselves and to the God who created them? How can I help them? When Jesus came to this planet, I can only imagine how many times God could finally say, I am done with these people. I'm through. It's over. But when Jesus came, He says He came out and saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion for them because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. So He began to teach them many things. Can we not say about ourselves that I've been embarrassed about myself, how I've behaved at times? Do I not remember who I was once? And that they have been caught into the web and trap of Satan? Instead of embarrassment, we need to think those things that are positive. And then, instead of despair, we need to remember that God is for us. Always, always say these words: while there is life, there is hope. While there is life, there's hope. That father, when he saw the prodigal son coming, What image does that paint in your mind? That he always was looking. And always imagine him every day waking up, looking to the horizon, hoping, praying, talking to God, praying that his son be chastised wherever he was, like God chastises all the sons he loves. Pray that he would wake up. And the moment that he sees him come over the horizon, does he wait for him to get in within earshot, bring his other son out and say, I only have one son. I got some things I want to say to you. And just let him have it. No, he ran to him. He ran to this rebellious boy and wept on his neck. And the Greek says, down upon him in the imperfect, again and again he kissed him and put sandals on his feet and commanded that the robe be given to him, honor, signet ring put on his finger, and a banquet to be made for him. This my son who was dead is alive again. This my son who was lost is found. Let all despair not consume us. Manasseh came back. That story in the Old Testament. Can people return to God who have walked way away from Him? I've seen it. You've seen it. And we have to have the hope that God has. And in a bitterness, we need to do exactly what the Bible says in Ephesians 4:31 about bitterness. Let all bitterness, along with other things He lists there, let all bitterness be put away from you. Bitterness will just consume you. It will destroy you. Put it away. That's the command of God. It only hurts the one who harbors it. And then, as I've said to you about guilt, remember two things. First of all, Jesus lost sons too. Not just Judas Iscariot, countless others who have walked away from Him. And He has done everything right, and He's done everything the way He should. That passage, as I said to you last night, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. We cannot make that be an absolute. These are maxims. These are the way things usually work. But if we make it absolute, then you have to ask yourself about other proverbs, about Jesus, for instance. Proverbs 10:4, he who deals with a slack hand becomes poor, but the hand of the diligent makes one rich. Jesus was poor. Do you think He's slack? Or the fear of the Lord prolongs days, but the years of the wicked will be shortened. Jesus didn't live but to 33 probably. Does that mean He is wicked? When man's ways please the Lord, He makes even His enemies to be at peace with Him. I'm going to tell you, Jesus had plenty of enemies. You see, they're not absolutes. And we must not make Proverbs 22 verse 6. They are general maxims of how things usually operate. But if we are guilty, folks, and we can be, then all I know to say to you is like we are about every other guilt of sin that we do. If our guilt of sin is we are like Eli and David, then go to God and seek His forgiveness. Go to your son and daughter and tell them where you failed them. Maybe in that humility and that acknowledgement of pain that may have been caused, that you caused, that I caused, they will see a heart, a winsomeness that draws them back. They only will see that in somebody humble enough to not stand up somehow and put on a facade and say, I didn't do anything wrong. You ever watch yourself and other people that the moment something happens, we circle the wagons and we defend ourselves? You watch it next time and ask yourself, when you say word, yeah, but, you've just not acknowledged anything the other party said to you. You're thinking about how you can defend yourself. And sometimes, folks, we just need to just be humble enough to say, you know, you're right. And I see that. Well, the Bible then says to us some things as we draw this lesson to its close, is some takeaways. First of all, think about that true love is the answer. 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4 says, love suffers long. It doesn't die when the child slams the door in our face. Love that dies under mistreatment is not the love of God. Jesus didn't give up because everybody put him to death. It is not provoked. I will not lash out at my rebellious child in rashness. It does not seek its own, verse 5. I will not be embarrassed for me. Verse 7, it hopes all things. I will never despair. Verse 4, it does not envy. It doesn't look at folks who have good, obedient children and resent them in bitterness because their family has turned out well. In verse 4, it is kind. It does not approve of the wrongdoing. It never will tolerate the wrongdoing. It never will aid the wrongdoing. But neither does it become bitter and harsh and hateful. Love does not rejoice in iniquity. We will not help them in their sin. Too many parents get sentimental, and when they realize their alcoholic, drug-laden, wicked son or daughter is going to be out on the gutter in the street, keep giving them money. Keep funneling them money that they turn around and do what with? The sin that they are involved in. When God reached a point with His children that He realized there was nothing left. In fact, the Bible says it this way. In 2 Chronicles 36, when there was no remedy, the Babylonians came. Sometimes love must be tough, and funneling them money to continue in their wickedness is not the answer. Does not rejoice in iniquity. In verse 4, it is not puffed up. I've been such a good father and mother, how could this happen to me? Verse 5, it keeps, the NIV, no record of wrongs, forgiveness, the prodigal's father, that we welcome them back when we know the slightest hope that they are coming to their senses. The rebellious child may still come home. A friend of mine that I share in common, that our parents walked away from God. I have really godly grandparents. Salt of the earth, as we say. My dad's parents were the reason, earthly reason, that I was motivated not only to become a Christian from an earthly standpoint, those things that are taught you, but to desire it to the point that I realized I could proclaim the gospel. That's what I ought to do with my life. My grandparents are the earthly reason for that. My mom and dad served God for a time, but they went far away from God. And I had to confront them on occasions. You want to talk about how wrong that seems. One thing for a parent to confront a child, try being the child confronting your parents. Everything they remembered about anything I had ever done that was wrong. My dad one time wrote me a letter and it was delineated point by point by point by point. And all I could do to try to get through him, to get to him, was to say, "You're right. I admit these things. But here's the difference between me and you. You won't admit the things that I have had to tell you. You want to try that one?" I pray I did it in the right way. My dad finally, on a sick bed in a hospital, you're having to go see a father who you don't have any relationship with. Because the Bible says, honor your father and your mother. It doesn't say honor your father and your mother if they're righteous. It doesn't say honor your father and mother if they follow God. It says honor your father and your mother. because they're your father and your mother. I always tell people, it doesn't say you have to honor your siblings. There's a line. My dad, I'm thankful, said, I have something to say from his sick bed. My mom and sister were in the room. And he said, I have not lived like I ought to live, and I want you to know that. And I hugged his neck, and I prayed that day would come, and it seemingly has been before him and God things that are taken care of. But I'm going to tell you, there's consequences to all sin. And there's so much of his family who have walked away from God that ultimately he's responsible for. But you can still go to heaven, even when you fail so miserably in life. Those people may never come back, but as much as I can earthly know, my dad did. I have a friend named Greg whose mother did the same thing, left them. I remember when she left them when we were in college, turned her back and went to another man, lived for the next 30 or 40 years, I don't remember now how to add it all up, for it probably 40, with that man. But one day she came to herself, the words of the prodigal son, and said to that man and to those people that loved her like their own mother, I have no right to be married to you. I have no right before God to be in this marriage. And she came back. And he called me up that day and said, my mom, and she's still faithful, still a part of the same congregation where he now serves as an elder. I mean, those are days of rejoicing. Things you could never think could have happened. They did. And I pray they'll continue. And I have seen prodigal children come home too. While there's life, there's hope. Remember those words. And then the hurting parent goes to prayer because you have nowhere else to go. Abraham Lincoln said that during the Civil War. He went to his knees because there was nowhere else to go. He often went to his knees. Casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. 1 Peter 5, verse 7. That we cast our care upon him, for he loves us. And pray and pray and pray that while there's life, they'll wake up before it's everlastingly too late. And then, finally, we need to remember the heart of the Father. We need to remember how he grieves. We need to remember all that he's done. We need to remember that he watched his son. He watched the Son of God be beaten to a bloody pulp, back lacerated beyond recognition. Men who Eusebius, the bishop at Caesarea, wrote about crucifixion, that their organs were exposed and they died there before they ever reached the cross. But he went to the cross. And they nailed him to that tree. And the earth quaked. And at the height of day, the sun was blocked. And sometimes you think about God holding the earth in his hands. And just with one mighty push, vindicate his son. But he didn't. And he let it go all the way until he died. And they spit at him and railed against him and hated him what Dad, reading that story, give me every weapon I need, and we'll just go in there blazing guns and kill them. That's what a dad would do. But not the Father. His love for his children, so pure, intense, and hoping. So when I grieve for my rebellious child, you remember how much God grieves. He created their very soul. Well, that's all I've come to say today. I hope it helps. Maybe it'll help you when you're in a dark hour. So thank you very much for listening. I will praise you with all